Good evening and welcome everyone. After our holiday recess. So as usual, we're going to spend roughly first half hour of me basically speaking, lecturing, and then the rest of the time for questions, answers, and comments. And presumably people have what to say about the current situation of the war in the Holy Land of Israel. So I would like to dedicate the class for the safety and the security of the Jewish people in the land of Israel and of all good people in the land of Israel, and especially for the soldiers of the IDF and for the safe return of the captives. Should be miraculous. Now, having said that, today, this week, is a wonderful week to study about the 7 Noach commandments. Next week is Parshas Noach. But this week, we have creation. It's Bereshis, it's Genesis. This week's Torah portion, what will be read in all synagogues this coming Shabbos, Saturday morning, will be the first Torah portion of the 53 Torah portions. Gracious. And of course, the purpose of creation is to get to the 6th day of creation, which is the creation of Adam, man, Adam and Chava, mankind. And then, of course, we get to the Shabbos. But in this parsha, in this section, we actually have most of the Noachide commandments. Not in Parshas Noach, but really, initially, Adam was commanded with the, according to our tradition, the first 6 commandments, all but Eiver min hachai, except for the prohibition of eating a limb off of a live animal. The first 6 were already given to Adam, and that's what he had to keep. Now, we have the creation of man. So let me just read from the Chumash and translate. So in chapter 1, verse 26, Vayomer Elokim, and God said, Naaseh Adam, let us make Adam, translated as man, B'tzalmeinu Kidmuseinu. Not easy words to translate into English, but B'tzalmeinu would be translated as in our image. Kidmuseinu, in our likeness. Whatever that means. V'yirdu, and they will dominate, man will dominate. V'dgas hayom, in the fish of the sea. U'va'if hashamayim, and in the birds of the sky, of the heaven. U'va'behema, and the animals. U'v'chol haaretz, and in the entire earth. U'v'chol haremes al haaretz, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So basically, after everything was created, then God says, let us make man, and he is to dominate over all of creation, over everything. And the next verse, verse 27, Vayiver Elokim es Adam b'tzalmoi. Indeed, and God created the man in his image or in his form, b'tzelem Elokim, in the form or image of God. Bara Oisa created him. Zachar in a cave of Bara Oisam, male and female, he created them. And the next verse says that God blessed them and told them, fruit urevu, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the land, the earth, and conquer it. All right, so that is the command / blessing to multiply, to be fruitful, to have children. So the whole discussion, even though it's not officially one of the seven, but there is the concept of having children, that is an obligation on some level for sure for mankind to try to reproduce. And there's a lot, many commentaries on these verses in general. This section in the Torah, this story of creation, has so much because we're actually speaking about creation. It's not a simple story. First and foremost, when one studies the Chumash, so we learn with Rashi, which is the primary, straightforward commentary. And just to share with you some of what Rashi says, but there are many more commentaries. So first of all, Rashi is bothered in verse 26 when God says, Na'aseh Adam, let us make man. Who in the world is God speaking to? Why in the plural? So Rashi explains that even though nobody assisted God in creation and in creating man as well, and as a matter of fact, written the way it is, leaves room for heresy, for heretics to say nonsense and to rebel by saying, you see, pluralism or whatever, or God has assistance, whatever you want to say. And yet, God did not refrain from saying it that way because it's to teach us proper manners and humility, that a greater person should consult with someone who is less than they are, and so to say, get permission from a smaller one. Okay. But then Rashi points out, as soon as you get to verse 26, it says, and God created man. So you see that he did it in all by himself. He did not need any assistance. Now, what does Bitsalmeinu mean? So Rashi says, Bitfus Shalanu, in our form. What's Kidmuseinu, in our likeness? Lahavinu lahaskil, to understand and to be intellectually creative. So the question is, what exactly does that mean, that we're in the image of God and the form of God? What does that mean? So there are many different interpretations, and we're going to take a certain approach, the way that it's relevant to our discussion of the seven mitzvahs. So we're going to try now to start a new book. Book's not so new, but for us it is. And it's a pretty good book. I haven't read every single page cover to cover, but from what I've seen, he does a pretty good job, because you see, when it comes to the Noahide commandments, I think it's fair to say that it can be divided up into two different aspects. Some of the books out there, some of them are good and some of them are even better. Out of all the books that are out there, there's, generally speaking, two approaches. One is the technical, practical, legal approach, such as the Divine Code by Rabbi Moshe Wiener, which deals in detail with all the do's and the don'ts. And it's a code of law. It's the Shulchan Aruch, the code of law for non-Jews, for Noachites. Then you have those books, and again, some good and some even better, which are dealing with the spirituality or the theory or the theology about the Noahide commandments. Some of them deal with Kabbalah, the colors of the rainbow, and each one of the seven, how it corresponds to one of the seven attributes, because one of the interpretations that were created in the form and in the image or the likeness of God is that just like he created for himself three levels of intelligence, of intellect, called Chachma, Bina, Das, which is an acronym Chabad. That's what Chabad is. Chabad is three levels of the intellect. And then he created 7 emotional character traits. And those are called Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hoid, Yesoid, and number 7, Malchus. And that's a lot of Kabbalistic mysticism and a lot of Hasidus. So the 7 Noahide commandments correspond to those 7. And then there's lots of ethical explanations and theoretical explanations. This book, The Theory and Practice of Universal Ethics, the Noahide Laws, sort of deals with both and blends them both in a nice way. This is written by a Rabbi Cowen, Rabbi Dr. Cowen from Melbourne, Australia. And he does a pretty good job, as I mentioned. So we're going to start with the introduction. I was going back and forth with myself. Should I skip the introduction or should I not? And if it would have been a little shorter, I would have definitely said we should not skip it. It's not very long, but it's a little bit lengthy, just a bit. And I still decided at the end that we're going to do the introduction inside, but we're not going to skip it. So I don't think that you will mind. Now, most of you probably don't have it in front of you, and I'm assuming that it's still in print and you can get it.
I put a link in the chat.
Oh, excellent, excellent. So I would strongly advise people to get it. I'm not sure how much it costs. My assumption is it's probably about $30 American.
Less.
Oh, good. How much? 20 some?
Yeah, I bought a copy in New York. It was about 26, 27 bucks.
Okay, very good, very good. It's an investment, a well spent money. Okay. So introduction, and again, for those that don't have it in sight to follow, I understand. So bear with me. Okay, I'm going to read the introduction. Now, again, you have to understand he's trying to introduce people that have very little to no knowledge at all about the whole concept of the Noahide commandments and the universal laws and things like that, and why and what. So he's just presenting it even for people that are absolute beginners, and surely for people that are more advanced also. In the search, experienced as particularly important today for values by which individuals and cultures might live well and peacefully together, there is a set of universal laws which has been little explored. Now, again, he wrote this a number of years ago, about 10 years ago. Sorry, more like 20. When did it first come out? First came out about 10 years ago. Yeah. So it came out 10 years ago. And obviously, over those 10 years, a lot has happened in the world. And it's as much as it was always important over the past 10 years, especially over the past couple of years, the past few months, when the world is in many, many ways so confused, to say the least. That's an understatement. People and individuals and cultures are searching for what to do. It has, however, been extant for thousands of years and is the root of the major world religions and cultures, as well as of major doctrines of modernity ushered in by the Renaissance. Its values are concrete and capable of precise application to all the issues of contemporary society and life. That includes a lot, as we all know, and we've discussed different things. Anything of contemporary society and life is covered by these 7. Moreover, their universality, both in spiritual and historical terms, potentially endows them with a legitimacy for all peoples. These are 7 laws which are biblically binding on all humanity. And again, we get them from this week's Torah portion in Genesis. And of course, you need the oral law to be able to expound and understand most of it. So that we have the Talmud Sanhedrin, as he footnotes. They are prohibitions on idolatry, blasphemy, forbidden sexual relations, theft, murder, lawlessness, the failure to establish courts and process of justice, and the improper treatment of nature, framed as a prohibition of the consumption of the limb of a living animal. They are known as the Noahide laws, after Noah, the biblical survivor of the flood, an ancestor of all humanity. The reason for this is ostensibly that, although 6 of the laws were commanded to the first person, Adam, the 7 laws were completed with Noah, to whom the 7th commandment was given. Only after the flood was it permitted to humanity to slaughter meat for consumption. And with this came the law prohibiting one to eat the limb of a living animal. Okay, for now, we'll try not to do any of the footnotes. I'll try to stay away from them. I may not be able to succeed. I may be drawn to some, but we're going to try to skip the footnotes so we can at least go through the entire introduction. These laws are an intrinsic possession of humanity. Again, it's for every human being. For to use the biblical phrase, the human being is, as I just read for you from Genesis chapter 1, created in the image of God. That is to say, fitted to imitate God. And this imitation takes place through the performance of the divinely given Noahide commandments. The image of God in humanity is a potentiality. It could and did come to the fore in exemplary human beings. It was submerged and even, so to speak, removed from those who made a travesty of the Noahide laws. There were 10 generations from Adam to Noah. This long epic of humanity was a history of degeneration and removal of the divine image from humanity. It went from bad to worse. From the beginning of the first sins, which the first sin obviously is very famous and well known, when they ate from the tree of knowledge, when they were commanded not to. And then right after that, the first murder committed with Cain and Abel, and then a whole bunch of other things going all the way down till they got to the point of Noah's generation. Noah was unable to redeem the cumulative history of foregoing generations. His luminous ark was the refuge of the ideal of a redeemed humanity and nature. God commanded him to make the ark, and in the ark, it was like redemption. It was like living in the past before the sin of eating from the tree, or fast forward into the Messianic era. Another 10 generations passed from Noah to Abraham. Whilst both intervals of 10 generations are part of what the sages called the epic of void or spiritual darkness, the Hebrew word would be tohu, which is actually the second word in the Bible, in the Chumash. Genesis 1:2 uses that word tohu, which means chaos or void, darkness. Abraham's relationship to the epic which preceded him was different. He was able to redeem the 10 generations which preceded him. See, Noah, what he could do was save himself and his immediate family. And he warned the world. It took him many years to build this ark, and it was done in public, but he could not redeem them. So all those 10 generations, or whoever was up to that point, had to be completely destroyed. Whereas Abram was at a much higher level, although Noah was also a very righteous person. Abram was a much higher level of righteousness, that he was able to redeem the world. He didn't have to just make an ark and save himself and start all over again, but his work was to change the whole world. This was because the service of Abraham marked the beginning of a new era in humanity, called the Epic of Divine Teaching. And again, in the original words in the Talmud, the first era is called Tohu, void, and this era is called Torah. Torah, divine teaching. Divine teaching is associated with the metaphor of light, symbolizing clear and manifest godly truth. Just as the divine teaching, through its commandments, formed the instrument of the refinement of the world, so Abraham worked on the human environment around him. In the process, he himself practiced and spread the observance of the Noahide laws, starting with the recognition of God. That's the basis of everything, as we've discussed many times. Ideally, you're not supposed to just keep these laws because ethically they make sense and God is out of the picture. The basis for them is God. As well as keeping the commandment of circumcision, that was Abraham, which was given to him as a specific law for his family and forms the bridge to the further group of commandments incumbent on the Jewish people to be given later at Sinai. Abraham is commonly acknowledged as the historical and spiritual ancestor of the group of major world religions and cultures: Judaism, lahavdil, Christianity, and Islam, which of course are the three major religions. In addition to the small number of adherents of Judaism in the present world, the adherents of Christianity and Islam constitute 55% of the world's inhabitants. Okay, that was 10 years ago at the time that he wrote this. I don't think that really changed much. Now, you would never guess, listening to the news and knowing what's going on, you would never guess that Jews are approximately 1% of the world population. It doesn't make any sense. How could there be so much going on and so much noise and so much around such a tiny minority? And yet, those are the numbers. That's the fact. Whilst Judaism consciously transmits the Noahide laws, there are strong traces and elements of the Abrahamic Noahide root teachings in Christianity and Islam. Now, although they deviate and there's problems with Christianity and Islam, but we can find the 7 Noahide roots rooted there. What is less well known is that after the passing of his wife, the matriarch Sarah, mother of his son Isaac, Abraham remarried and had further sons from Keturah, or at least according to Rashi, same person as Hagar, his original wife. Well, original was Sarah, but I mean the one that the maidservant from Egypt that Sarah pushed him to marry and have children from was Hagar. So later on, after Sarah dies, it says that he had children from Keturah, and according to Rashi, Keturah is in fact Hagar, who had previously borne him Yishmael. So if we're going to assume that Keturah is Hagar, that means she is the mother of Ishmael. So meaning to say that Ishmael, which is basically the Arab world, comes from Abraham. These further sons, the Bible relates, were sent off to the east by Abraham. This is very clear. This is in the text. This is not just the oral tradition, in the Chumash. Rabbi Menashe ben Israel, in his work Nishmas Chaim, states that these sons went to India and disseminated the teachings of Abraham concerning the eternity and reincarnation of the soul. So they're into spiritual stuff. He associates the term Brahman relating to the overarching spiritual principle of Hinduism with what were originally Abrahamin, the sons of Abraham. So in other words, he claims, the Nishmas Chaim, that the whole Hinduism, that religion actually goes back to Abraham, or at least to these children that he sent off to the east. It is interesting to note a contemporary echo of that relationship of Hinduism with Abrahamic monotheism in the declaration of the Second Hindu-Jewish Summit of 2008, held in Jerusalem, in which, in the words of the declaration, quote, the participants reaffirmed their commitment to deepening this bilateral relationship predicated on the recognition of one supreme being, creator and guide of the cosmos, shared values and similar historical experiences. Pretty interesting. And now he goes on to explain. Buddhism is in turn a derivative of Hinduism, incorporating many of its seminal spiritual notations. Whilst Buddhism has often been portrayed as a religion which is not theistic, it actually displays a negative route to the same transcendent deity. In the words of a contemporary writer, Buddhism does not require a focus on relationship with God, but it shares a recognition that unhealthy attachments to things that are not God are at the root of human suffering. So in other words, just from a negative way, it's against being anti-God. In line with this is a meditation used in certain contemporary psychological therapies whereby a power outside of oneself is identified. A power greater than self, which is not self. It is not so much that what it asks is to believe in God, as that they must believe that they are not God. Again, it's from a negative point of view, saying that they're not telling you you have to believe in God, but they're telling you that you can't believe in anything else and don't think that you are. Hence, traces of Abrahamic Noahide theology are to be found in both these Eastern religions, as in the other religions, as in the main religions, of course, Judaism, and again, Lahavdil, Christianity and Islam. However differently the former developed. Together with this common spiritual heritage comes the ability to hear a common set of root values, which in their pure original expression are the Noahide laws. So I believe what he's trying to do over here is not to alienate people, but to tell them, look, if you really do the research and if you really try to go to the root, you'll see that besides the big three, of course, there's the seven Noahide, but even these other religions, which of course we reject for various reasons, but you should know that they are rooted in these seven laws. In the present world, the adherents of Christianity and Islam, as noted, constitute 55% of the world's inhabitants. And these have a strong background in the Abrahamic, Noahide, and biblical traditions. The adherents of Hinduism and Buddhism constitute another 21% of the world's population. That's a lot. As mentioned, traces of the same ancient affinity with Abraham and his teachings are found in them also. So consequently, in total, 76% of the world's population have a connection with Abrahamic teaching of the Noahide laws. Now again, he's being kind of liberal and generous, but the point he wants to make is that it's not like, oh, nobody has any connection to these seven and we have to now reinvent the wheel and reintroduce something which no one has any connection to. That's not the case. It is interesting to note that another 14% of the world's people, officially classed as non-believing, are largely to be accounted for as the result of Chinese communist, former Soviet, Russian, and Eastern Bloc political inculcation in generations of atheism. In historical terms, this is a relatively recent overlay over a much deeper collective memory. Now a little bit history. Indeed, one now sees a major revival of religion in Russia and Eastern Europe, and even in China, which is still formerly a communist state. There is a strong resurgence of Christianity. It has been pointed out that even secular humanism, the expression of much Western, non-communist induced atheism, also has roots in values of essentially religious origin. Its program of social welfare are based ultimately on religious concepts of charity and justice. The great jurists of the Renaissance, from which secular humanism begins, Hugo Grotius and John Selden, both reached back to the Noahide laws to establish fundamental legal doctrines which have inspired ideals of secular Western thinking down to the present. So he's making a very interesting argument that really everything goes back to this divine set of laws, even by people that are atheists, and they claim that we're just doing this because it's moral and it just makes sense and it's the right thing to do. He says, no, it really has its roots. The tradition of the Noahide laws and theology was kept by Isaac and Jacob and the sons of Jacob, who went down to Egypt, where the Jewish people grew. The Jewish people comes fully into its own at Sinai, where the written law, the Pentateuch, and the oral law, the commentary and the elucidation of the written law, were given. The rabbinic tradition down to this day, which carries and elaborates the oral law, is a unique hermeneutic path, which by virtue of the profound receptivity of each generation of scholars to the foregoing generation of teachers, ensures a continuous and unified alignment with the original revelation to Moses at Sinai. So that's just a little, in a nutshell, how the Torah works, meaning to say that the Jewish people formally and spiritually and legally became the Jewish nation at the revelation at Sinai, when we were given the Torah. The Noahide laws, originally revealed to Adam and Noach, were reiterated at Sinai in the written and oral law, which made known that they had previously been given. Their definitive statement at Sinai and the revelation of their details in the oral law is now the source of their teachings, accessible through the tradition from Sinai, which continues through to our generation. In other words, as we've discussed previous times, even though they were given to Adam and Noach, but according to some, at a certain point, they became voluntary because mankind basically rejected them. So therefore, God kind of removed the obligation and said, okay, now they're not obligatory. They're optional, according to some. At any rate, once the Torah was given at Sinai, now through that, it became obligatory for all of mankind to keep these 7 because of the revelation at Sinai. Through the dissemination of this knowledge, the common Noahide ethical template, latent in the spiritual makeup of humanity, as well as the collective historical memory of Noachism in the world, religions, and cultures, can be crystallized into consciousness. It also emerges when the major faiths come to defend, in the face of modern legislation hostile to their traditions, their shared values. It is then that the Noahide common denominator values emerge. Okay, so obviously this person is taking it from a very religious, spiritual, and political and historic perspective and putting it all together. Abraham, long before the complete formation of the Jewish people at Sinai, was known as a Ivri, Hebrew, and this Hebraic tradition is, of course, consolidated in the scriptures of the Jewish people from and after Sinai. In modern times, elements of Noachidism have become increasingly disseminated, especially in Western cultures. Yet those nations with traditions which consciously relate to the biblical monotheism projected by Abraham and from Sinai in the Pentateuch and the prophets such as the societies of North America and Great Britain, with their historical and cultural offshoots, such as Australia, again, this person is Australian, have come furthermost in the crystallization of the Noahide values. Perhaps the most explicit expression of this development is to be found in a joint resolution of both houses of the United States Congress in 1991, which begins with the following words. Now, this, of course, was in honor of the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach's birthday. It was his 89th birthday, which means going into his 90th year. And at that time, as you could see in footnote 18, exactly the legal technicalities of which law it is. And actually, the Rebbe Melech did speak about the divine providence, that it's resolution number 104 and what that symbolizes in Jewish numbers and so on. But what does it say? And we quote, this is a, so to say, legal declaration of the United States Congress, the House of Representatives and the Congress. Whereas Congress recognizes the historical tradition of ethical values and principles, which are the basis of civilized society and upon which our great nation was founded. Whereas these ethical values and principles have been the bedrock of society from the dawn of civilization, when they were known as the 7 Noahide laws. Whereas without these ethical values and principles, the edifice of civilization stands in serious peril of returning to chaos. Very clear. This statement was followed by the acknowledgement of the leader of another continent, Australia, in 2008, Major General Michael Jeffrey, who wrote that the 7 Noahide laws, or ethical principles, apply to all contemporary issues and therefore play an important role in our day-to-day lives. Further, the author himself, Rabbi Cowen, in 2012, received a statement of acknowledgement by King Mohammed VI of Morocco of efforts in setting out what is the Noahide root of the universal contribution of the Abrahamic religions and filling the gaps between religions and civilizations. Most recently, the author undertook to write a brief manual entitled An Education in a Shared Ethic, in which a set of fundamental values are affirmed by leading Christian and Muslim scholars as constituting a common ethic of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The values upon which agreement was found were essentially those embodied in the Noahide laws. Then in 2014, the author received a letter from Mr. Herman Van Rompuy, president of the European Union, in which he wrote, "Shared values, shared laws, reiterated for all humanity at Sinai. I am particularly honored to add my name to the cause of the dissemination of the universal values known as the Noahide laws." The task of the first part of this work is to elaborate the worldview, the theory of the Noahide laws in terms which one educated in secular contemporary culture will understand. So he's not writing this for learned people. He's writing for people secular people. Each chapter of this part is preceded by an overview or summary. Here, one can offer for it a summary of summaries. The first part traces the significance of the expression of the ethical worldview of the Noahide laws through levels of or perceptive on human existence. It necessarily begins with 1, the idea of the human soul made in the image of God, in which the Noahide laws gain their foundation. The knowledge of the soul then proceeds down to number 2, into the realm of intellect, tutoring and forming the concept of rationality itself. Therefore, number 3, the Noahide laws are understood as giving moral content to the psychological matrix of human personality as a complex of body, mind, and soul, operating in personal and interpersonal domains, as well as in the domain of human nature. From understanding the Noahide laws in terms of the matrix of individual human personality, they are then grasped, number 4, as the norms organizing society collectively in its interrelated dimensions of fundamental worldview, moral culture, and social organization. From there, the Noahide laws are grasped. Number 5, in the realm of the state, in terms of a relationship of private and public morality and religion and state. This discussion is extended to the role of the Noahide laws in the international community of states, and that's where it becomes technical and all the laws and all the do's and don'ts. The second part of this work deals with the concrete and specific practice of the Noahide laws. While these ethical laws are the general legacy of all humanity, it is Jewish tradition particularly, however, which has transmitted and expounded their content in detail. Note, you have to turn to the Torah to know what they really are. It has done this in the tradition of commentary, which began at Sinai and explicit both aspects of the laws revealed at Sinai. The universal Noahide laws given to all humanity and the specific laws additionally given to the Jewish people. The layout of the second part reflects this. The main text of this part, like the first part, is written in language meant to be accessible to all. The footnotes throughout the second part and the more technical, methodical parts of its introductory chapter 6, on the other hand, are written for those interested in and acquainted with the language of the sources of the Noahide laws and tradition from Sinai. Those who have not acquired this background can skip these and proceed straight to the more general parts of chapter 6 and the main text of chapters 7 through 13, detailing the Noahide laws without loss of clarity. This second part, in covering the actual conduct of the Noahide laws, seeks to be both comprehensive in that it systematically sets out and relates the principal categories of Noahide law, and selective by restricting itself to a number of major pertinent laws within each of these categories. The efforts made to learn, observe, and promote the wider observance of the Noahide laws rapidly actualize their purpose, to contribute to the actual transformation of the world into a dwelling place for the revealed divine. In other words, to finally get to Moshiach, into the Messianic era. Okay, so that's the introduction, and he explained how the layout and how the whole setup of this is going to be. Very interesting how he puts it as to the connection that everybody already has anyway, basically with the 7 Noahide laws. All right, at this point, anybody have anything that they want to share, ask, comment, whether it's on what we just read in this introduction, or whether it's the obviously what's in our minds. Surely myself as a Jew, and I'm assuming that everybody, the very, very difficult situation happening in the Holy Land of Israel in this wartime right now. Anybody have anything they want to add, ask, clarify?
Yes, Rabbi.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, so there's 2 things I'm curious about. One of them is were these gentlemen, Chabad, all of the gentlemen who were legitimizing or trying to get these things legitimized in these different nations, and were these different nations talking to representatives from Chabad? Because I know the Rabbi, he wrote the letter, I believe, to the president or someone, related to getting this Noahide law established here. And so is this Chabad making sure that the Noahide laws are legitimated in the nations, the major nations around the world? That's number one.
Chabad yes, it's let me respond to that.
Okay.
As a response to the call and to the campaign that the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach came out with in the early 1980s. So yes, so the fact that Congress made this resolution was a result of the efforts made by Hasidim, by followers of the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach, and then likewise in Australia, which was this Rabbi Cowen. Yes.
Okay, so I also noticed that with Ask Noah, which is like the largest organization that I've come across, they have representatives in Chabad groups all over the world, and they literally list all the individuals in these groups on their website. And so I've even met Rabbi Epstein here in Chicago. So I know that these people are there to be contacted, communicated with anyone, by anyone who wants to know anything about what's going on with Noahide things in that particular area where they live at. So this is a massive effort that I'm seeing that's actually on the ground moving and working towards trying to prepare for the eventual Noahides that are going to come along in all of these different nations all over the world, so that they don't have to face a lot of the things that people who don't have these things in place do. I mean, for a new religion to pop up would be kind of strange, but what this is it legitimizes the Noahide faith as a real faith in the world with these nations. Now, I've talked to people, and I've seen some people have some pushback against the Chabad efforts. And I was wondering, why is that these groups that are other Noahide groups have such disdain for the efforts that are being done? I mean, I've even noticed that there's a Rabbi Cowen in New York who has actually tried to establish a place in the United Nations for the Noahides that will later grow down the road to represent their issues. And I think that's an important step. So I see it as making the faith a legitimate thing for people to see, but at the same time, I don't know why we would be getting pushbacks from other groups because of this.
So that Rabbi Yaakov Dovid Cowen in the UN, I know very well personally. He's Chabad.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
their pushback is, why is Chabad pushing all of these efforts?
Because that is the call of the hour, and the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach, who sees what needs to be done. So just like he made ultimately a 10-point mitzvah campaign for us to reach out to other Jews. For example, right before the 6-Day War broke out, he came out with a campaign of tefillin, the phylacteries that we're supposed to, and ever since then, your Chabad, a rabbi, or not just rabbi, anybody who's Chabad, is always going around with a pair of tefillin and offering Jews to put on tefillin. And especially Friday afternoons, all the boys, when they don't have, any classes, they go out and they put tefillin on Jews. We have tanks, mitzvah tanks, which is actually a RV or something like that, transformed into a spiritual tank. And right now in the war, those tanks are actually going to the front lines together with the military tanks. And this is the spiritual ammunition to get the soldiers to put on tefillin, because that's going to give us our success and victory. And then he came out with a campaign of mezuzah, total of 10 campaigns, and then some. So then came to a certain point where he said, now is the time to campaign and to promote and to educate all of mankind, because who is a Noahide? Every human being on the face of the earth that's not Jewish is a Noahide, whether they know it or not. One does not need to become a Noahide or to accept anything. Noahide means one who is a descendant of Noah and is not Jewish. They now need to keep these 7 commandments, and that's why Chabad started doing it. And like many other things, which is a beautiful thing, finally, others come on board as well. So today, you will find other Jews going around putting tefillin on other people. Clearly, historically, it was started by the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach himself, and no one else ever did that, go around to other Jews and stand in the street corner and offer them to put on tefillin, or to give women and girls the candles to light on Shabbos, before Shabbos, I should say, on Friday afternoon. That is a campaign that he started. Now others are doing it. So likewise, others, thank God, are also involved in spreading and promoting the what they have against Chabad. You'd have to ask them. I don't know.
Okay, Gisham has a question. I would like to hear his.
Hello, Rabbi Turin. Me and my father have been calling the Hamas Amalek. Is this a correct term? I mean, I've known the term Amalek already. It's like a group or person that is committed to destroying the Jewish people. So is calling Hamas Amalek an appropriate term now?
Okay, so first of all, you and your father are not the only ones that are using that terminology for the terrorist organization of Hamas by calling them Amalek. I've heard many people say that and refer to that. So I'm going to answer that on two levels. On the one hand, Amalek is a very specific nation, and ever since Sancheriv, the king of Ashur, ancient Ashur, mixed up the world population, we cannot be certain of any human being as to which nation he really comes from. Like the Egyptians today that live in the land of Egypt are not necessarily the original descendants of the Egyptians that enslaved the Jewish people, and so on. So as far as that's concerned, we don't know who Amalek is, and therefore we cannot say that there's a mitzvah for the Jewish people, commandment, to destroy and kill every Amaleki, because every Hamas member or every Hamas terrorist, because we don't know that that person is Amalek. For example, in recent history, because what's happening today, many have pointed out, has not happened on such a level ever since the Holocaust. Many people referred to the Nazis of Germany as Amalek. Again, same answer. They weren't necessarily literally Amalek. That's on the one hand. However, the other point is, in a spiritual sense, not in a technical legal sense, in a spiritual sense, people that are so undescribably, ruthlessly disgusting, and I wouldn't even call them animals because they have no right to be called animals, because they're much worse than animals. So people that are so terrible, in a spiritual sense, one can say, yes, that's Amalek, because Amalek is the worst nation, and that Amalek has to be totally eradicated and totally destroyed. So yes, then is there an obligation to kill and destroy Hamas? Absolutely. But it's not because we have to kill Amalek. It's because we have to keep people safe and secure, and we have to destroy evil. And since these people in this organization is an evil organization, to say the least, therefore they have to be totally destroyed. So you want to call them Amalek, I don't see any problem with that, but just realize that you're not being very literal and very, they're not literally necessarily Amalek. People feel that they must be from Amalek if they're so bad. See, going back historically, as we're going to see in next week's Torah portion, Amalek is actually a descendant of Esav, and Esav is a grandson of Abraham. So it is that Semitic people, and it is some of the Arabs. But again, if you want to be very general, Yishmael is the father of the Arabs, and then Esav is a lot of Arabs. But again, it's all mixed up today. So the Arabs of today, we cannot say that they are biological descendants of Yishmael or Esav or Amalek. So to sum it up, on the one hand, literally, we don't know who's from any nation. On the other hand, yes, if you want to use the word Amalek as the despicable nation that has to be totally wiped out, then I'm with you. And then, yes, those Arabs that are Hamas, or for that matter, any other such organization, PLO or whatever, there's so many of them, yes, they should all be completely destroyed, wiped out.
Thank you for the answer, Rabbi.
Anyone else? Okay, so let me conclude with some practical advice. What can we do for the current situation? If I know that any moral human being wants to do something. So in this case, a lot of times we hear about wars that are going on in the world, and like we feel bad and what can be done. In this particular case, I have a lot to tell Jewish people, but what I will tell the Noachites, the B'nai Noach, the non-Jewish world, is you can pray for the success and for the victory of the Jewish people of the land of Israel, and to get rid of the evil. And along with that prayer, for the healing of all of the many wounded people. And when I say wounded, it's not only physically. The trauma that people have gone through, countless people, even people that miraculously were, thank God, survived. But because of what they saw and witnessed, the trauma is unimaginable. They're scarred so deeply, so they need healing. And of course, for the captives, the hostages that are alive, that were taken, that they too should miraculously be saved. So number one is to pray for all of that. Another very powerful thing, which is also relevant to Noachites, is charity, tzedakah. When we give tzedakah, that helps. So to give tzedakah. And finally, exactly what we're doing, but to promote it and to spread the 7 Noachite commandments, to get as many people on board with knowing and observing and keeping these 7 commandments because they're God-given. Because after all, the reason or the cause of how you can have such unimaginable human beings behaving in such a unimaginable way is a lack of keeping the Noachite commandments. They may claim that theologically they're Muslim. Okay, this is the Islamic religion. And therefore, you can't say that they're atheists and don't believe in God. They say, of course we believe in God. And I feel terrible even saying these words, but they may claim that they are, quote unquote, doing this in the name of God, Allah Akbar, which is insane. So it's the fact that they don't know and they don't accept and they don't believe in the one and only God of Israel, who created the world, who gave at Sinai the 7 Noachite commandments for all of mankind. And included in that is not to kill, not to steal, etc. And they're transgressing big time. So when we, in a different continent altogether, strengthen ourselves in our commitment to these 7 laws because they're God-given, and we influence other people, that has a spiritual effect, and that weakens their evil and their might and strength, and weakens them. So all we can do is, and of course, demand Mashiach now, because then we'll see an end of all of this, and then we'll finally get to the finish line, and then we'll finally realize full redemption when once and for all eternity, as all the prophets speak about, that Hashem, God, is going to reign and be revealed, and we're going to have the 3rd temple in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount, and all of mankind is going to be serving God in unison. So any such individuals or organizations that are doing this will be wiped away forever and will be destroyed, because this is evil in its fullest sense, unimaginable. And then all of mankind will be able to unite, and there'll be eternal peace And this is what we have to demand and pray for, and not just ask God, but we actually are supposed to demand it and say enough is enough, and we want Mashiach now. All right? And it's important, this is difficult and challenging for some people, but it's important to have trust in God. And we Americans are very proud that on every piece of currency, whether it's a coin or whether it's a bill, it says, in God we trust. And the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach has spoken a number of times that that's so beautiful, that mentions God on the currency, on the money. And not only does it say in God we believe, but it takes it to a deeper level, a stronger level, and that's trust. You can believe, but not necessarily trust. But here we trust in God. So it's very important that we stay upbeat and positive and happy and trust in God. So hopefully by next class, we will have only good news. And this upcoming week is going to be a week full of miracles and salvations and good news. And of course, way above and beyond any of that, Mashiach. Therefore, by next week, we'll already be deep into the redemption in the Messianic era. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi. A lot of good information.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're very welcome. Be well, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks.
Bye.
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 Okay.